Yes, that's right. Why?
Okay, great. Thanks for all getting back so promptly. I have to say, as delegates go, great on timing, thanks. So, we come to the finale, which Teresa Hadfield is going to produce a paper on recruiting for Taboo research. And this is going to be introduced by Lizzie and Gemma from Acumen, as they have an awful lot of experience with this in terms of our social and medical divisions. So, without further ado, Lizzie and Gemma.
Before Theresa talks to you more in depth about conducting research with more hard-to-reach people on taboo subjects, myself and Gemma would just like to briefly touch on some of the key points surrounding recruitment of these types of participants. So first of all, I'd like you to take a look at this list, and these are some of the projects that we've taken on at Acumen over the past few years. Have a think about how you would recruit some of these people. See it?
You have to read them out.
Recreational steroid drug users, melatonin drug users, homeless people, second-generation Ghanaians, people with HIV, cancer sufferers, mums of children with tuberous sclerosis complex, sexually active teenagers, people who suffer from excessive sweating, erectile dysfunction and incontinent males. These are just a few examples. Sometimes the traditional methods just aren't suitable, and we need to step out of our comfort zone and use a mixture of methods to reach respondents who may be on the margins of society. We need to be creative, break the mould, and look for new techniques to recruit these respondents. We find a lot of our usual recruiters shy away from taking on the grittier social and medical projects. So quite often, we complete the recruitment ourselves in-house. So firstly, before we can decide on what recruitment approach we're going to adopt, we need to be really clear on exactly who it is that we're looking to speak to, what's the purpose of the study, and what the researcher is looking to get out of the project. Can we disclose who the end client is? For example, if it's the NHS, it could really add reassurance to the respondent. On the medical team, we're often met with disease areas and medications that we've not come across before. So primary desk research is essential for us to understand the disease area, incidence rates and severity of the condition. After we've started to understand the type of respondents required, we can really begin to make informed decisions about what recruitment methods are best, usually not just one approach. So, the role of the recruiter. As the tone of the project is set at the recruitment stage, these are a few points that we really need to consider. A good solid recruitment screener is crucial. We work closely with our clients to ensure that all the questions are covered in a sensitive manner. Using language that the respondents will understand, not being too technical or medical, or using terminology that people may not be familiar with. Correct pronunciation is important for the medical team when discussing diseases and medications, which can sometimes be a mouthful. It's essential we build trust and rapport for sensitive topics. For example, would a female recruiter be more successful in recruiting a female-related topic? Maybe surprisingly, we've found when recruiting males for more personal projects, such as incontinence or erectile dysfunction, that they're actually happy to speak to a female recruiter. Maybe they think that a female might be more sympathetic. We need to find the balance between our respondents feeling comfortable discussing personal and sensitive issues whilst also staying subjective, which often means leaving our own personal views and opinions at the door and not judging people. We need to listen to respondents but also stay detached. We had a medical project where we were recruiting mums of very poorly children who were born with a rare genetic disorder. Listening to those mums talk about how they fought for their children every day and everything that they did for them was upsetting. In these situations, we need to allow more time to go through the recruitment screen with them.
So, moving on to the methodology, how do we go about actually finding these respondents? We've researched into our topic, spoken in depth with the clients, and hopefully created a watertight recruitment questionnaire. As Lizzie has mentioned, we don't always have the help of external recruiters, so now comes the time when we step up our field worker role, get our hands dirty in the field of recruitment. Here's a list of some of the methods that we've used in the past to ensure that we reach those respondents who are sometimes residing on the outskirts of society. Support groups are a great way to gain access to a community. Having the understanding and cooperation of a forum or patient association can really make or break a project. Social media as a research method is currently a hot topic in the research world. I tend to agree with the points made in Research Opinions' earlier presentation, in that social media, if used correctly, can allow us to gain access to certain pockets of society which have been previously hard to reach. For example, when searching for transgenders in London, I use Facebook as both a research and a recruitment tool. Through Facebook, access to a transgender community was instant. In fact, in just one click, I was a member of a London transgender group. I was then able to sit back and observe the group activity before posting a carefully thought out introduction about myself and why I wanted to speak with members of the transgender community. This then allowed members of the group to choose whether they wanted to get in touch with me and find out more. I find it's always easier to build a sense of trust and rapport if you are relatable. At the first stage of contact, the only thing the transgender group and I had in common was that we both had Facebook accounts, but I believe that this platform was enough to get my foot in the door. I was then able to successfully recruit 2 members of the London transgender community, and my client received valuable insights into a hard-to-reach and marginalised community, and this was all due to Facebook. Healthcare professionals have been very helpful for our medical team, but with the masses of red tape, it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to assist in patient recruitment. Our own medical database has proven essential in recruiting healthcare professionals, patients, and also families of these patients. Spreading the word is another simple but useful method. For example, when set with the task of finding second-generation Ghanaians living in the Manchester area, passing out flyers, chatting to locals, and even attending an elders' luncheon all helped me get a foot in the door and hopefully find that gatekeeper into the community. I find that frequent updates with the client are vital in helping manage expectations, but also to highlight any recruitment difficulties that could ultimately influence the project. Another example, when faced with the task of finding current male steroid users, and after exhausting many recruitment methods, such as conversations with local Manchester drug centres, other drug users, and even my gym-going male friends, it quickly became obvious that there was so much secrecy and stigma attached to men using steroids that finding even one male to admit to it would be a mammoth task in itself. At this point, I needed to go straight back to my client and discuss other ways to approach this taboo subject. There are some differences between regular consumer versus social and medical research that we need to consider. So here's some things to keep in mind. Us, the recruiters, and our clients need to be flexible and remember that these are not our typical mums who buy baked beans once a fortnight. These respondents are most likely coming from dysfunctional backgrounds. They may be dependent on drugs, homeless, or even terminally ill. Our clients need to be able to accommodate any last-minute changes and be ready for the unexpected. It can often be difficult to recontact our respondents once we have made that initial inroad. The respondent may not even have access to a phone, and we need to keep in mind that they're not able to speak as freely about the subject matter. A suitable venue and even the format of the research session need to be carefully considered. Our usual focus group in a hotel may be intimidating or completely inappropriate for our respondents. Maybe a paired depth in Starbucks would be more appropriate for my young recreational drug users, or a one-on-one in-home depth is best suited for our terminally ill patient who cannot leave the house. In addition, we need to explain to our clients that comprehensive data collection may not always be an option. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is keeping the respondent as number one. Our recruited respondents may not have even heard of market research, so before we enter into any contract, we need to ensure that we offer a clear and comprehensive explanation of exactly what market research is. We outline what is expected from them, and even what topics will be discussed if our clients will allow it. We aim to be as transparent as possible to ensure the respondents feel totally comfortable sharing their opinions and experiences on the sometimes very sensitive research matters. We need to remember that the topic may be upsetting for both the moderator and the respondent, so we explain to our respondents that it's their right to withdraw from the research at any time. As always, we follow all the relevant guidelines, and respondents are reassured that their views are kept confidential. Another point to consider is incentivising these taboo sessions. One question which we are continually asked by our clients is it always appropriate to offer a cash incentive? And the answer is yes. We cannot discriminate, although sometimes some respondents may prefer donations. Another thing to keep in mind, it's not always possible to offer a cash incentive, for example when doing research on behalf of a charity, but everyone needs to keep in mind that everybody's time is precious, and even the bare minimum travel expenses should really be covered. Another thing to notice as well is that a good incentive can sometimes lead to good commitment. Okay, so these types of projects are more time consuming, but the hard work does pay off and the outcome is so rewarding, as well as giving us a valuable experience in how to break the recruitment boundaries to find those hard to reach respondents.
Here at Acumen, we're constantly amazed at what information people voluntarily give you. We have said it could be the embarrassing bodies effect, where society is quite desensitised and actually maybe nothing is taboo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Lizzie. I think Gemma realised she was in her absolutely ideal job when she had to take her dad as bodyguard to some dodgy gyms in Salford to find steroid users. We like initiation by fire here. Yeah. So, moving on, and closely related, Teresa Hadfield is now going to share a paper with top tips for taboo subjects.
Bit of a mouthful.
Hello.
Just earlier this week, I canvassed some views of my colleagues to get examples of where recruitment had made a huge difference to the success of the project and where it had gone completely pear-shaped for them. And before I go on and kind of do this talk, I thought I'd just share them because I thought they were I got some really, really good examples. And I'll start with the one where it went wrong. And I don't know whether you recall the adult literacy campaign with the gremlins in the cupboard, yeah? So researching that campaign, and the researcher wanted to talk to adults with literacy problems. Now clearly nobody particularly wants to say no, I can't really. The recruitment was fine for 7 respondents, but the 8th respondent was somebody with Down syndrome. So what happened was you've got 7 adults there saying, I've got some literacy problems. Actually then sitting next to somebody with Down syndrome who clearly had far more problems, all 7 stopped talking. They weren't going to discuss it because they felt they'd been classed into a group of people with actually severe disability. So that's where it went completely wrong. Where it went really, really well was researcher had to do some work on erectile dysfunction. Not only did they have to do this nice project, but they wanted to do it in a viewing studio with the clients watching. The recruiter managed to get 8 respondents who were absolutely fabulous in terms of they were confident and comfortable about talking about it, and that's what made a huge difference. That every single person knew exactly what they were coming to talk about. They were therefore much more comfortable. And so I just use those as examples to show how much difference it makes to the research. Right, top tips for taboo topics. It's a whole area. It's a really big area of research and it's not talked about anywhere near enough. And also, it's an area that a lot of people are not that comfortable with. So it's worth opening the discussion. I am, by the way, very happy to take questions as and when we go through this. So, all kinds of nice subjects in there. I started off by just looking at some definitions. So, sensitive research is defined as research where there are potential consequences or implications for participants. Actually, I think that applies to most research we do. So you could say that all research is sensitive in some form or other. Oh. Taboo is research which possesses a substantial threat to those who are or have been involved in it. Well, I hope that actually none of our research ever presents a substantial threat. The one that is more interesting, I want to go to the next one. The definition that I actually feel most comfortable with is where we're actually intruding into people's lives. So I'll look at this. Right. Three main areas here. An intrusive threat when we're dealing with topics that are private, stressful, sacred. Sexual behaviour, abuse, religious practices. Where there's a threat of sanction, where the research actually might reveal information that's incriminating or stigmatising, drug addiction, benefit fraud. Or where there's a potential political or social threat, where behaviours or attitudes might conflict with the vested interests of those in power, choosing not to have your children vaccinated, holding racist views, being alcoholic, the realities of policing or prison and probation. So basically, we're looking at areas where we're intruding into a personal sphere, we're delving deeply into their personal experience, we're looking at deviance or social control, or where things impinge on the vested interests of the powerful, and obviously something that's sacred to participants. So why me? Yeah, I'm white, middle class, middle-aged, educated, just right for these sensitive subjects. I'm not a trained counsellor, but I am a good researcher, and actually anybody can do this from any walk of life. I have got a fair amount of experience on talking to sexually active children, teenagers, talking to poor about how it feels to be poor in the recession, talking to benefit fraudsters. They're not nice. Not having children vaccinated, and more recently talking to patients who are dying of cancer. So, top tips. It's a series of kind of practical things that I've pulled together from experience. Methodology, right at the beginning. This needs to be thought about really carefully. Who are we going to talk to? Who do we want to talk to? Are there any issues about getting to talk to them? So when you want to talk to Bangladeshi women about their attitudes, most of the time they're chaperones, so you have to think about how you're going to get to them without their chaperones. We ended up doing that in playgroups where they took the children and they weren't chaperoned. How are we going to find them? This is where a very open discussion between the researcher and those who are actually going to be recruiting these people needs to happen. And I'm talking about this at the methodology stage. I'm not talking about, I've got a proposal, it's gone to the client, they've accepted it, and then I'm going to go and find all the problems. I'm talking about right up front. Sometimes it just can't be done. You know, so there are examples when you sit there and say, actually, we're not going to be able to do that, so we have to think of a different way of going about the project. Where we're going to do it. This is the flexibility that's required here is really important. So, you know, maybe you do it just in the street, at a playgroup, in the pub. It doesn't matter where you do it, so long as you do it somewhere where the respondent is feeling really comfortable. It requires a lot of patience. You could do it outside here in the sun. It requires a lot of patience and tenacity. So, you know, when we were doing this project with patients who are in the last stages of cancer, dying of cancer, we needed to get the interviews in quite quickly because these people are dying, to be, you know, to be quite frank. But equally, you had to allow for the fact that they might have medical interventions or personal care interventions whilst we were doing the interviews. So you just have to kind of sit around and wait and say, when can you do it? We'll be there and we'll do it at that stage. So that flexibility is needed. And the other thing I'd just say is there is a whole area of personal safety that comes with this. I did a project with alcoholic men in Manchester, and I was going to their houses to interview them. And of course I'm arriving there with my 50 quids, you know, and I have to say it was a project where I was very, very uncomfortable because I couldn't guarantee that when I got to these houses the men were even sober, and in certain cases they weren't. So I always try and arrange with somebody that they know that I'm going to do this interview, I'm doing it for this amount of time, I will text you as soon as I get out. If I haven't texted at the time I've said I'm going to finish, they call me. And they're the only times when I actually leave my phone on during interviews or groups. Okay, the other area is, do you actually need to see them face to face? Can you do it via a bulletin board? They've recruited some lovely lesbians and gay men for me. And the level of honesty and detail and the information that went out of those groups by not seeing those people was fantastic. I did also get some really dodgy websites that I wanted to scrub off my hard drive. But sometimes you can do it by phone, you know, texting, that kind of thing. You don't always have to see them in person, and I think it's important that everybody questions the way we do this research and are we doing it right for respondents. Anxiety is right. This is, everybody feels anxious about these projects, and anybody who says they don't is lying. You know, if I'm there, I'm really anxious about, are they going to talk about it? Will they tell me enough? Is it going to be too painful for them to talk about it? And one of the things that tends to happen is right at the beginning of the project, you're almost oversensitised to this is a sensitive area and they might not want to talk about it. By the end of the project, I'm like, oh yeah, you know, another one of these people dying of cancer. I mean, I don't actually feel like that, but there's a danger that over the course of the project, especially if it's a long one, that can change, and you just have to be aware of it. I will echo this need to download. Some of these subjects, you go home and you know you're into your normal life, and you kind of think, oh, I can't deal with this. It can really touch you. I mean, I have to say, with the benefit for all ones, I know those respondents. They sat there telling me what they were doing, and I wanted to poke their eyes out. And I was really cross when I got home. But so you need to have somewhere downloading that and getting rid of it, because otherwise you carry it with you all the way through the project. The other area that's really interesting is this kind of a whole area of a reciprocal relationship. It really comes, the relationship between the respondent and the researcher, and in fact the recruiter, comes under scrutiny with these subjects. So it's not an equal relationship in any form. We're doing the research because it's necessary, and I've yet to come across a project where actually what I was being asked to look at wasn't important or valuable. And so long as you can see the reason for the project and it makes sense, then that's good enough reason for doing it. It's not exploitative though. We're looking for their opinions, and generally in giving their opinions it's something that's going to help them in some form or other. But we're not trained counsellors. We're not there to improve their lives, we're not there to judge their behaviour or share our views with them. We ask the questions and we let them talk in as non-directive a way as possible. It's quite important that respondents don't pigeonhole us into a certain category, i.e. they expect me to have such and such views, and I have to be very careful of that. I'm not supposed to be there empathising with them. I'm not there to make them feel better, and they will look at me and say, you have no understanding of my life, and that's absolutely right. I therefore don't try to. What's really important is establishing that safe place where for a short period of time respondents know they can trust you, they can say what they want, and it can be a difficult thing to do there. To make that work, we have to set it up right from the beginning of the project to make sure that the respondent knows that it will be set up to suit them and they are important and vital to my success, in fact. And that comes back again to the recruitment stage, being very, very specific about what we want to talk about and why we want to do it. And there's very few cases where respondents shouldn't know exactly what they're going to talk about. And I know it does help to be able to talk about the client, who the client is, and if there has to be a very good reason not to be telling them who the client is. There are some things we can do to help it all. Okay, positionality or stance. This is just about knowing yourself. We've all got our own views. They're based on who we are, our life experiences, our attitudes, numerous other influences. And it's really important to recognise those before you go into the research and you dump them for the period of research. I'm a mother of a 17-year-old daughter, and I know exactly what my views are about girls who have sex with several men or boys in a night. But when I'm doing that research, I have absolutely no view on it, and that's a perfectly fine way to behave. So it's really important to kind of just dump all of that. And as I say, certainly when I was doing the benefit report, I really hated those responses. Some obvious pointers that help to establish this whole area of a safe space and trust, and they're in non-verbal cues. Don't park your flash car outside. Dump your mulberry handbag. And remove your designer clothes. It doesn't matter if they're fake, it just says all the wrong thing. And actually, I don't care if the respondent is sitting dressed head to toe in designer gear. I would be in neutral M&S clothes that nobody will know where they came from. And it is, you don't have a taxi that turns up and waits for you outside with a meter clocking, because it just sets all the wrong tone. The other thing is, don't take clients with you. Sometimes you can't record it. If the respondent's uncomfortable, don't record it. Try and scribble some notes. Ask them if you could take photographs with your phone, that kind of thing. Do it to suit them. So teenagers quite often don't like sitting down and talking to you. You might be better just leaning on a wall talking to them. Sit in the playground, sit in the park with them, stand in the kitchen. We've interviewed autistic children behind a sofa, because that's where they were comfortable talking. And that's fine, we'll do it however it needs to be done. Time is the other really, really big issue. We have to allow so much more time for this research. So not only does it take longer to recruit, but it takes longer to do the interviews with the groups. We don't book them back to back because there's anything that can interrupt them. And actually, you can do 45 minutes of chat and get nothing, and suddenly, the last 10 minutes, a Pandora's box opens and it all falls out. And what I don't want to do is stop after those 15 minutes. If it's taken them 45 minutes to warm up to telling me what they think, I want to be able to wait until they finish. Sometimes you do get a load of rubbish for 15 minutes, for 10 minutes of golden gems, but that's also the way it goes. From a research point of view, perhaps not as relevant for you in this room, the other really important thing is not to fill silences. When you're doing research and you're nervous and you're trying, the danger is you kind of fill all that gap, and actually what we want to do is leave that space for them to talk if they want to. Language is the other area. I spend a lot of time creating discussion guides and looking at different ways of asking the same question, because the way I ask that question can be critical to the response I get back. This is true of recruitment questionnaires. It's really important to know how we're going to ask those questions of respondents. And once you've got the right language, it's actually then much easier to talk about these sensitive subjects. Confidentiality and anonymity. We have to have respect for participants, their needs and their wishes. So we need to create that environment of trust, we need to reassure them. And actually, that's about knowing what they're going to be talking about, making sure that we tell them very, very clearly that what they say is anonymous and confidential. We need to be able to explain to them, why do we keep their names and addresses then? If it's confidential, why do we need their names and addresses? And what do we do them? I also always offer them a get out of jail free card, which is if at any point you're feeling really uncomfortable with this, then you can stop it. It's in their power to stop it. But I do remind them there is an incentive, and they don't get the incentive unless they do it. And actually, with these kind of projects, I pay the incentive personally, myself, at the end of the group or the interview. Because I find it's just that bit of, they've not had their money, I've got their money, and actually I can then genuinely thank them. And what I quite often do is I get to the end of the interview, give them the money, and then I get another half hour's worth of stuff from them. And it's just a slight change in the way I handle that kind of project that seems to help. We do use lots of projectors in this kind of area, but we have to use them really, really carefully. And I have a battery of options that I use, and I'll change them depending on whether I'm talking to small kids or people with learning difficulties, or because we're talking about research, sometimes people can't read, so you can't give them magic list. So just to really reassure that we do think about these things before we go into the project. So I might use a lot of pictures to actually ask them to explain their feelings, because they can't talk about their feelings, but they can do it visually. Those are some of them, and they end up with lots of words. Okay. In your comfort zone was the other thing. I might be okay about talking about this subject, but I won't get a good project if everybody isn't comfortable about talking. So, from your field agency to recruiters, to transcribers, to anybody who's typing up your report, if anybody has anybody who types up a report, to do that myself nowadays. But it's really important to have the discussion and the conversation with everybody working on the project, and making sure that that dialogue is open. So is everybody using the same language? Are they using the same words? Do we all know exactly what we're looking for? Somebody gave me a lovely example this week. They said they were talking about diarrhea. They were doing a project in Pakistan, and they were talking to men about diarrhea and treatments for diarrhea, and the moderator was fine with this, the respondents were fine with this, but it was being translated, and about 20 minutes into the group, the translator stood up and just said, "This is disgusting, I'm not doing it," and walked out. And it was just like, and I mean, I don't do Masters of International work, but it's just a reminder to say everybody's got to feel comfortable about this. They all need to know what they're talking about. Don't give anybody some surprises. And the other thing is just be wary also of leaving stimulus materials around, show cards and all that kind of thing. I have seriously embarrassed my daughter by doing the analysis for the Condom Essential Wear campaign, and I had all the boards that ran the kitchen when her friends walked in. Okay, that's not a great idea. So that's really it. Just a quick run through of areas that seem to have come up frequently, some techniques for getting around them, and some approaches. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. That's great. Just going to open up the floor. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask Teresa? We all good? Go on, Bipple.
Not a question, but more of a thought. Sometimes researchers do go into some dangerous situations that you don't really think about if you're an agency or even as a recruiter. But yeah, no, all the power to you, I suppose, for doing it. But I mean, have you had any incidents that really caused you concern before?
Yes, definitely. One was the example when I was talking to alcoholic men in Manchester, and I certainly had one interview where I went to, the guy seemed to be sober, but then he had his friend arrive, and at which point I just said, "Do you know what, I'm really sorry, I've forgotten something." Went out, then rang the doorbell back and said, "I'm really sorry, I've had a call that's come through, I need to stop this and go." So I just had to, I was so comfortable to do it.
So what do you do as a fieldwork agency or as a recruiter to try and minimise that risk that you as a researcher face, really?
I don't think you can do an awful lot, really. It's keeping records, so you've got the right name, the right address, and we've got the right contact details. So should anything happen, you've got some comeback. But I don't think you can do much else about it. I think it's a responsibility for the researcher to make sure that they are communicating where they are when they're leaving.
Would you prefer kind of social research or consumer?
Intellectual interest, social research, money and ease, consumer. Sorry, that's
That's not you.
That's true.
Yasmin?
Yes, a quick question. You talked about holding onto the incentives till the end of the interview. Was that exclusively when you're doing this kind of taboo research, or in general?
Interesting, I think my view is changing more on that, in that I am more comfortable now if I'm given the incentive at the end of the group. Not least because when we do plenty of beer work here, and you know, 18-year-old boys who've had a few drinks next door when they come in for the second group, and they're misbehaving, and it just allows me to say, do you know what, if you're not staying on track, we'll call it a day, and you've not had your money yet. And it just helps me sometimes.
I agree, it's just that we found recently facilities or anywhere are giving out the incentives at the beginning, and my researchers are really annoyed about that because they don't think that they're getting as much out of the respondent.
Yeah, I think it is. Practically, it's easier to pay them when they're around and get it all the paperwork sorted. But my preference is always to pay at the end.
Shall I answer your question? Yes. Is there any particular subjects that you've done over the years that you felt really uncomfortable with?
I feel uncomfortable with all of them when I start off.
Yeah.
The only one I really, really did not like doing was benefit fraud. And I liked it because the reason for the project was really sensible. But just the attitudes that I met were just astounding. I couldn't believe it. So that's the only one where I actually hated some of those responses.
Thinking of the benefit fraud side of it, how do you actually find someone who's willing to talk, and what are the repercussions to them? I mean...
Well, they get an amnesty.
Oh, right.
And actually, you'd be surprised at just how brazen they are about it. And, you know, once took people are quite proud of it.
Some of them boast about it, to be honest, so, because of the fact that they're getting away with something and it's for free.
So did you actually have to find the respondents yourself, or were they provided by government agencies that you
were free recruited. I mean, actually, when I say I hated all those respondents, there was a lovely group in Liverpool where they were committing just a small amount of benefit fraud. So it was like women who might work a couple of hours in a shop, and they were fantastic because they talked about, you know, I get 10 quid a week, and that pays for the kids' birthday presents and things like that. And in the group, in one of those groups, one of the women about halfway through suddenly said, well, I've got this little job, but what I'm really, really worried about is, you know, my son, who's going to be 18 next month, and he's got his A-levels and all this kind of thing. Well, actually, he'd been in prison for 18 months, and she'd be getting a child benefit. And, you know, so you get really, really nice revelations of that. She'd spent every penny of that child benefit going to visit him and taking him socks and pants and trainers at the prison. And, you know, and then you've got somebody who sits there and says, well, I've got children and I live separate from my partner because then we can both get a housing benefit and da-da-da-da-da. And he drives up in his swanky BMW.
Anybody else? Well, in that case, thank you very much, Teresa. That was excellent. Okay, well, that concludes the weird and wonderful world of field. We feel very strongly, as I know all you guys do, that field is hugely important and has been and can be overlooked sometimes, and we all do a very, very good and difficult job, I think. So I think it's been great to get together and just be able to get some dialogue going. A few really boring things. First of all, I will email all the presentations over to you guys next week. I just didn't think I would hand them all out, because all your bags are up on the landing for you to get whenever you require. If you can stay, do have coffee, that's fine. I know you've all got trains to get, so if you have to go, that's absolutely fine. And another reminder, just to fill in your voting forms and your feedback forms, which would be great, because I'm going to present any information that I get from those back to the MRS and the AQR. Okay, thank you very much.